I'm out here in my fruit orchard. We got 25 acres. My wife and I are now worth over $5 million. And I'm thinking about a lot of stuff related to finances, especially for normal people, right? Walking around the fruit orchard, I'm finishing up cutting all this grass. It's just pouring rain, listening to some music. And one of the things I wanted to think about and share with you guys is I look at stocks very, very, very similarly. I look at money and finances very similar to our fruits, okay, to our fruit trees. I know this sounds crazy, but one of the things that I like to think through, I'm also finishing up a cigar. My wife and I are purchasing a 50-acre property, and I look at finances for normal people, okay, people who don't fall into a lot of money, people who have to have more income than expenses. We've got to look at stuff like the financial setup that we're in, like the fruit orchard. Okay, so the first tree that I had showed you there, I planted back in 2019, and this year it's probably going to have probably around 50 apples, a couple pears on there. We got our nectarines, we actually have some plums right here, and we just got our blackberries up there, our persimmons, our pawpaws, and I'm finishing up my Cuban. And I think when we're thinking through finances, I look at this as the long-term play, the long-term growth that we have to work towards, right? But then I think about, it's stormed, it's raining. So there's things that happen, like the Israel-Iran situation, and Trumpsky seems to have settled it pretty freaking well. I look at some of the long-term plays. We did have some fungus 2 years ago that came through and hurt some of our trees. And I looked at that stuff as like the storms, right? The little random stuff, the tariff discussion and all of those things. Look at these guys right here. Got a couple on the little tree. We planted this one last year. What's this? But one of the things that I wanted to share is we're looking right now at even the discussion around interest rates, right? Trump this past week said Jerome Powell is stupid. At the end of his conference, he called the dude, he said he's low IQ, he's bad at his job, and he's not doing what he needs to do. And he even talked about things like, why won't you just cut rates, especially it's coming up in July. And if, inflation goes back up, got some more right here coming in. Look at these guys coming in. And if inflation does go back up, you can just raise the rates, or you can raise the rates back up. Okay, so this is an interesting discussion, and there's a lot at play because we know that Donald Trump is going to he has to appoint someone probably about 3 months prior to Powell exiting, which is in 11 months. But what seems to be happening, and this is one of our first pear trees here, what seems to be happening is that he's already getting governors on the Fed board there, Bowman, Waller, already starting to say we should be talking about raising or lowering interest rates. They're already saying let's lower interest rates, let's lower it, because they know they want to get that job. Okay, they want to be appointed next. Okay, so Waller, Bowman, they're probably in the lead right now because they're playing the game. And we've seen them when we closed the market on Friday, an all-time high in the S&P. And we're seeing money is really starting to come into the market, okay, and things are starting to skyrocket. And so oftentimes we start to panic and we're like, oh my gosh, we gotta jump in. Let's just put our money in. And you might put it in and then you're like, well, what the heck? It's not doing anything. It's all this up and down. But just like these freaking fruit trees, we've got to have our senses and play the long game, right? We've got to go through the long game. And so one factor, I'm going to get rid of this cigar. One of the factors that I like to think through here is all we can do, okay, first, more income than expenses. And then I want to share a couple different factors. A stock right now that has it's been a pulp stock, beaten to a pulp, okay? What stock would that be? Nike. What's happening with Nike? They're starting to pop off. And I forget the new CEO's name, I think Elliott something. He's basically signaling Nike, which is a mile off of their all-time highs, seems to be hitting the bottom of the barrel. It's a stock that I've had for quite a while, and it's starting to take off. Another stock that I own, Elf. I've stuck with it. And especially during the tariffs, I bought a lot more, okay, during that tariff discussion. They said they're going to raise their products by probably about $1. And it seems now what's happening with Elf? They're starting to take off, okay? So Elf's starting to grow. It's like, I want to say since April, an ungodly high amount, right? And so does that mean you have to go out and buy Nike or Elf? Maybe if you have the money, you do. But if you don't have the money, it's okay. You can still play the long game because there's a couple other stocks that you can get, but you still have to set things up, right? And we still have to take this step back and say, all right, I want to share the number one stock at the end here, but we got to take that step back and be like, look, we've got to weather this storm. We've got to make sure our income is higher than our expenses. We've got to make sure we have our debt in the right situation. We're paid off or we're using it strategically. We've got to make sure that everything is lined up. We've got to make sure that we have our emergency fund for 8 to 12 months laid out ahead of us. Okay, and that should be 8 to 12 months of your expenses per each month. So if you spend 10 grand a month to survive, and we've got 4 kids, we spend a little bit more than that each month to really lay everything out. You know, we're around $20,000 a month that we have in expenses. So we've got to have 10 to 12 months of that sitting on the sideline. Okay, so you got to have all of those things lined up, so that when stuff is starting to skyrocket, you're just constantly playing the long game. You're constantly thinking about, where am I going to be in 5 and 10 years? Okay. So the talk with Powell and him calling him low IQ, which is hilarious. And then him even calling out the Israel-Iran situation when they had the ceasefire and they bombed each other again. He's like, you guys are idiots. What are you doing? Stop. And now we're seeing, even with the tariffs, he came to an agreement on magnets with China. Okay, he came to an agreement with other types of things like that, like with minerals and earth and materials, right? So there's already some discussion, and basically he's saying those things have already been signed off on. So there's going to be more things with China that are going to be beneficial. He's still playing the hard game with Canada and saying, like, dude, I'm done with you guys, you're clowns. I'm not going to discuss that. But it should not matter as much to you guys. What should matter most to you is that you're going to play that long game. You're going to keep going towards playing the long game, okay? And so we've got to make sure our income is higher than our expenses. This goes back to last week when I talked about the average American's only working 34 hours a week. That means add 16 hours each week of work. Make more money than you're spending. And then you can just dollar cost average every single week. At the end of every week, you can buy in and you can look at these stocks. But you also, first thing you got to do, make sure that you have the debt covered. Make sure that you've got that emergency fund. Make sure that you get into ETFs first. If you want to do that, you got to get into VU. Then you can get into something, and I want to bring this up, is that as rates drop, start to strategically think about doing things like, all right, I might move some of my high yield savings money. Possibly what I'm thinking about doing is put that into something like SCHD, where the value stocks are as interest rates drop, because we won't get as much of a return out of that high yield savings. Okay. But at the end of the day, if we're looking at our value and our worth as an individual long term, okay, we have to think through, what are all those strategic moves that you play long term. Don't look at, okay, they're going to cut interest rates, and that means Bitcoin's going to go to the moon, which it might. But it's not the absolute best play right now as far as risk is concerned, okay? When you're looking at things like risk, plus reward, plus stability, plus financial and mental sanity, financial sanity, you have to alleviate things internally and think about the trends and where we're going, okay? So keep all of that stuff in mind as these interest rate discussions are coming. And the odds are, I'm leaning that I personally think there's like a 50-50 chance that they might cut rates by the end of July, okay? They have that big meeting, I think it's July 30th, if I remember correctly. Now, I also think that means in September, it's going to be, I won't say a slam dunk, but pretty likely by the end of September, we're going to see rates cut and things are going to just freaking go to the moon as they have, especially if the tariff stuff continues the way it's going, and if Trumpski can keep things at bay to maintain less volatility than what he's had with dealing with geopolitical situations, right? Now, I want to bring something up here. I think there's one stock out there, and I've mentioned this stock probably 5 times so far on this channel, Finance for Normal People, where we're talking about what we can do. And I said I bought a whole absolute shit ton of this back in March, April, and they're at they're still at a really good discount right now. They're not even close to their all-time highs, which is around $210, and that's AMD. AMD, in my mind, is run by who I believe in the next 2 to 3 years, their CEO will be known as probably a top 5 CEO in the entire world, Lisa Su, okay? And you're going to see what she's done. When she took over AMD, this stock was a $2 stock. Now this stock is at $143, if I remember correctly, okay? And people are like, well, it's going to go, and you're starting to see analysts. I do a lot of stuff on investing.com. This isn't a sponsored thing, but I'll go on there all day and I'll type in things and I'll just play around with different projections, and I'm looking at stuff. And now you're starting to see analysts, they want to buy AMD. They're talking about getting AMD. And so I've been thinking, okay, a year from today, I believe AMD is going to be around $220 to $230. So even today, if you purchase it at $140, $143, you're basically getting this for like an 80% discount, okay? So if you have done all the things of dotting your financial I's and crossing your financial T's, and you're taking care of everything, this is a stock that is going to continue to grow. And the people, okay, and if you look at the sector that AMD is in, it's going to continue to grow. NVIDIA is continuing to pop off. You're going to start Broadcom, another one. I'm not in Broadcom. A lot of people think, oh, it's better than AMD, but I'm looking at AMD and I'm going, it's the best buy in that area, okay? And I'm going to keep putting more into AMD. I've got ELF, I've got Nike, probably going to put even more, a little bit more, and might even take a risk and pull a trigger on Adobe, which I've talked about in the past. But you also can look at, with AMD, their best clients are also starting to grow. Google, okay, are continuously growing. Amazon, all these big time powerhouse companies that as rates drop and as the tariff discussion starts to really simmer down, which it already has, and as all these things happen, if we can maintain some stability in the financial and geopolitical world, we're going to see AMD go to the freaking moon. Now, that might mean, $220, $230 1 year from today in 2025. Okay, that might mean $300 to $400 by 2028. And it's a long play. That's 3 years from now. Okay, so it's not a game of thinking about, should we get into Bitcoin? It's a game of, what have you done financially? Have you paid off your debt? Okay, have you taken care of your emergency fund? Have you done all these things as effectively as possible? And then, do you have a house that you can raise a family in? You can do these things, and you can chip away at everything. And then you get into those simple ETFs, and then you can start to play around with stuff with that. And you can get to a point where, hey, guess what? Now I go in and I can buy a property and have a cash out refinance as a down payment. So those are the simple things that I think we all have to take care of up front before we really get into it. But I wanted to share this little analogy, because I was out here in the fruit orchard and I'm going, this is exactly, it's an exact comparison to the entire financial world. It's one of those games where it's got to be the long-term play. And at the same time, there's certain years that some of these trees will produce way more than some of these other trees. And then the next year, we might see something else start to pop off. We can see some of the blackberries starting to come in. We can see some of the raspberries coming in. And then we can see pear trees. And I know it's a crazy example, but we've got to play it one day at a time while thinking about the big picture. Don't get lost in the interest rates and who's going to be selected as the next head of the Fed and all those things. And Powell is crazy and he's a little bit slow with this. All of those things are accurate, but it shouldn't change your game. Okay, so I wanted to share that with you. Pay attention to the interest rates. That does matter, especially if you're going to try and take out a loan or a mortgage of some sort. That does matter, okay? But it still comes back to doing the simple stuff up front. But I want you to keep an eye on AMD. I've been talking about it since the channel started, okay? And I really think over the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see this one really, really take off, okay? So just keep that in mind. But do the simple stuff first. I wanted to share that. I hope that I helped somebody out there today. Peace.